Yo, 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 it's Johnny King with another episode of the Becoming King podcast. And I've got a little curveball on you today with a very special guest coming all from the other side of the kitchen table right here in Denver. Actually, not in person together, but she is here in Denver at the moment, even though she doesn't live in Ranit Damti, all the way from New York. How are you? Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Hell
I'm
yeah.
super excited to be here on a little
Yes.
trip to Denver, all the way from New York City.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that. But we connected initially on the old and we have mutual friends in common. And Traver, Uncivilized Nation, a bunch of the guys, Traver's gal pal, girlfriend. I don't want to say that. We have a lot of mutual connections, which I'm sure is kind of what initially started the following of each other. Let's say you are. Well, why don't you, rather than me telling what you are, why don't you tell us what you are in terms of just life coach and the honest compass, and how that'll be my next question. Just like, where did the idea of that come from?
All right. So yes, to echo everything you just said, that's we do have a lot of like mutual acquaintances, and it's been pretty amazing to be able to utilize social media in that way, since it's
Yeah.
usually demonized by me as well. Like I'm not a big fan of social media, never have been. And it's really cool to be able to create connections like that. So knowing you're in Denver, me coming here was just awesome to be able to meet in person and also get this podcast together.
Yeah.
So, so yes, my name is Ranit. I'm originally from Israel. I moved to the United States, to New York, about 8 years ago, and that's where I still live to this day. I'm just traveling right now, um, and I started the Honest Compass. I'll get into why it's called that in a minute, but I
Yeah.
started the Honest Compass as a mission and a calling, really, more than anything else, to help other women step into their power. And I'm always very mindful of how I describe that and word that, because I don't think, like, even the word empowerment has a bit of like a tricky energy for me, because I don't want it to come off as if women don't have power. Certain people don't have power. They need to learn how to have it, step into it, be in it. It's more like it's kind of like hidden, buried under a lot
Hmm.
of things, and we just want to uncover that and help it shine, but it's already there. So my own journey, I want to say 23 when I moved to the United States, and
Hmm.
a baby, I would say a child pretty much. And it was within a relationship. So what ended up happening is me basically transitioning from my parents' home and the family's home into this person's home, and remaining in the same role without ever going through the initiation of womanhood.
Hmm.
So the process of that, and the fact that I woke up to it and started doing the work um, to step into that existing power of mine,
Hmm.
is something that has been life changing for me. And I see it in a lot of women around me and in the world in general, where they have yet to realize the power that they have. And so they feel, this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but just a lot of people, I feel like it's more like them being afraid to admit it than actually it being true, where women feel that they need to be saved, helped, led through life, be shown the way. And there's a big difference between receiving that kind of support and taking a back seat and looking for someone to take care of you. So a rich history for me with that, which I can get into later if that's where we're going. But to keep it short, that's how I stepped into this role, and this is what the work that I do with women, and it really revolves around practices and actual tangible things that you can do to start realizing that you can have your own back, because it doesn't, just wake up one day and be like, oh, I got this now.
Hmm.
So um, so that's the story of that. And the reason I decided to name it the Honest Compass is because, well, it just so happens that when I was 23, on my 23rd birthday, I got well, your listeners can't see it, but if you're watching the video, there is a compass tattoo on my wrist. And obviously very unrelated, because I was 23 when I got it, but I've always had like this attraction or fascination with compasses. And when I was thinking about um, if I wanted to have a name for my business and what I wanted to be, that really kind of resonated with me, because I felt like the day that I started being very honest with myself about what my life is looking like and what I want them to look like, was the day I incorporated like radical honesty into my experience. And the
Mm.
compass is when, even when I got this specific tattoo done, it was to remind myself that home is where I make it and where the heart is, and not necessarily where I was born, or where somewhere else tells me that it is. So the combination of the honest compass is like you can honestly find your own direction within you. Your compass is already inside. So
I love that. Well, and too, the whole idea of, you know, which which is why I ultimately wanted to have this conversation, because so much of you're speaking to women, but you could very well be speaking to the men, right? In the same way that I speak to men, and very much could be speaking to the women. And the whole idea, like with, and sure Bohm talks about this a lot too, with the nice guy syndrome. It's the whole like happy wife, happy life. As long as she's happy, you know, then everything's good, right? And so men kind of take a back seat in some regards, and thinking, if you have two people who, the female's looking to be saved and he's just looking to appease and just a yes man. You have two people that are deeply wounded. You're not going to have a very intimate and deep connection between the two. And so, speaking from experience, quite frankly, like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in terms of being able to our true potential. And so I think that is, if put words in your mouth, but for me at least, that is the personal power I think to bring back to not only myself but other men. And it sounds like the same thing with women, which is like the personal power of like, so that you're secure and happy and you're intentional about your life. That'd be accurate.
absolutely, I second everything you said. I think that the only reason I don't speak to the man's experience verbatim is because I can't live it. I live in a woman's body and a woman's experience and a heterosexual experience. And it's, I believe that it affects like all kinds of relationships and all types of connections and even friendships and familial relationships. But what I
Totally.
speak to mostly is my own experience and my lived experience. So I agree with everything that you said. And I think that I can also speak from experience and say that when you're in that wounded space, you attract other individuals that are in a complementary wounded space. So it could
Hmm.
be the nice guy who's looking to appease or please, or it can be the kind of like shadow side of the warrior type where he's very dominant and is looking for someone to take care of.
Right.
So it wants like it could be, again, if it goes to the more shadowy part of it, it becomes domineering more than just like, oh, let me just help you and take care of you. And so in my own personal experience, that manifested in a way where the person I was with wasn't um, dominant in a bad way, or wasn't anything abusive or anything like that, but it just became very simple and easy for both of us to step into roles of like parent child. And we all know that's not conducive to a healthy romantic relationship, nor does it
Right.
last very
Right.
long.
Right.
So yes, from both ends, we end up attracting each other when we stay in those wounded patterns without realizing that the success and longevity of a relationship is really dependent on each person's independence on their
Yeah.
own.
Yeah. Do you feel like a lot of the power that you have reclaimed for yourself, continue to reclaim, um, was something that you, I don't want to give a leading question, so but I imagine a lot of it comes from your child or your culture or the times. Like, what do you feel like, just looking back at your own personal experience in the story? Did you lose your power, if you can even answer that? Or how do you see, maybe in your culture back home, where it's just, a lot of women are looking to be saved, or what's been your experience once?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in story of origin, and I do think I would say no, as far as anyone can know, as a fact that your origin story plays into who you turn out to be and what you become, and the relationships that have been modeled to you is where you kind of end up finding yourself in. So in my life in general, growing up as kind of like, I guess, medium socioeconomic background back home in Israel, I didn't actually see that many healthy relationships around me. A lot of them, even friendship, like friends and their parents and everything, were either single moms or like broken homes, whatever the definition of a broken home is. But speaking to my own personal experience through the dynamic of my parents, who are great people that I love to death, we always give this like almost like apologetic prelude to saying something that is going to sound bad, but it's not. It's the reality. It's a different generation that didn't know any better.
Yeah.
But having, for example, a mother that says a lot of things, has a lot of dreams, wants to do a lot of things, and these are all things that
Hmm.
we've talked about, her and I, and don't necessarily follow up on them, and almost is like waiting for someone else to make them come true for her. And if that doesn't happen, then they just don't happen. So when I started realizing the similarities between my own experience and how I kind of like the first time I think I started noticing it was when I was like, oh, I say a lot of things that I want to do, and like years go by and I'm stuck in this like matrix wheel of working and being home and working and making more money and barely even having a social life, to be honest, and realizing like, so what actually am I waiting for? What is this? Like, I had to pause for a minute and be like, well, I'm really actually reminding myself of my mother. And when I started looking into that and subsequently relationships that I've been in, I really started seeing my parents in the relationships that I've been modeling in different ways, where I basically am taking a backseat to something, but at the same time, shining a very powerful light in the things that I am good at and I am strong at, like the intellectual parts of whatever it is that you play out in a relationship. If it's putting off like, and this isn't necessarily exactly like my mother, but this is my own interpretation of what I've found in my life, putting off this really well-honed show of the super confident independent woman who deep down is still waiting to be saved and is not taking action in her own life to make things happen because the knight in shining armor hasn't arrived yet to make it happen.
Mm.
So 100% reliving a similar situation that I grew up in. Also witnessing conflicts not being kind of like solved in a healthy way. Same. Found myself really returning to the very same, very similar patterns. So yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it in terms of when I was previously married or other relationships where, and I wonder, just giving our parents maybe more credit, or grandparents or previous generations, it's like a lot of times I feel like, especially with the guys that I'm with, they know what they're doing isn't. They're like, how I'm showing up, the life that I've created, the lack of results, the feeling of being stuck. I know this is so not right. Right. And a lot of times they don't know what to do. They just know that they're unhealthy, unhappy. And a lot of times they just kind of stick in the sand. And I'm sure women have their own ways of doing the same thing. So I imagine, especially with like my mom, my dad, like just such complicated, adult things that they went through when they were married and that sort of thing. But again, doing the best they could with the tools they had, they just didn't have the tools that we now have available to us. The fact that we're having this conversation over the internet that goes onto a podcast for free, or we put it on YouTube free. There's so much content and so much availability now of information. Obviously, it's a beautiful thing, and it can also be overwhelming. But I do feel like it's our responsibility now that we know what we know, that we have to step into. But even knowing that, it's still freaking so difficult
Yeah,
to
very true.
get that power back and to transfer. Like how challenging has it been for you to have never been to the United States? You come over here in a relationship. How challenging has it been, your own personal growth journey over the 8 years? And what would you say is one of the areas that you've grown in the most personally?
Um, how challenging has it been? I can answer with crawl into like a fetal position and just stay in the corner forever is like that
Yeah.
level of challenging.
Yeah.
Um, it's crazy difficult. I think that it's I don't want to compare any experiences because we're all individuals. I think that it's really hard always to kind of like be initiated into adulthood because in our current modern society we don't get that at all. So whenever you wake up to that and you have to go through it, it's still challenging. But coming from my specific story, being in a foreign country where you didn't grow up in, and you don't know how it kind of like works with credit card and all that like bureaucracy and stuff that is very different from the country you grew up in, it feels like being a little child again, like very much
Mm,
so, where
mm.
you need that, which is why psychologically in my mind it's like my partner became like my parent, because I needed him to show me how
Just
to do, how
guidance.
to
Yeah.
live. Yeah,
Yeah.
guide me
Yeah.
how to like be an adult, which is a sucks all the romance out of the relationship. But
Yeah.
I do want to like I want to stop with something that you said that was very interesting, that I feel can be a similar yet different experience for women. You mentioned before that men often know that their life isn't what they want it to be and it's not feeling good. They just don't know what to do about it or are afraid to. And while that can very well be an experience for a woman, especially a woman who has already started asking questions but doesn't really know how to move forward from that, it's
Hmm.
oftentimes the exact opposite, where the woman, this specific woman or whoever, thinks everything's going right. Because, and I'll elaborate on that, society teaches us to gain this like validation and sense of appreciation from very superficial things that ultimately are not conducive to a fulfilling experience of life. So if I'm a young woman who, for whatever reason, attracts a lot of attention or is getting like hit on by a lot of men, desired, shall we say, then in my mind everything's working fine.
Mm.
Nothing's not okay. Everything's like okay, so whenever I'm ready for a relationship, it'll just come. It's as easy as that. Some women have that experience, other women maybe less so, but can still step into a place where they think like, oh, life is fine. I'm super independent. I'm a successful business owner, whatever the story is, where we actually think everything is fine. But it takes either that one like cosmic 2x4 to the head, like Mark Rove says. I love that phrase. Either
Yeah.
it takes that to wake you up, um, or you start slowly through an experience of life, be it, your own circle, like social circle changing around you, or the fact that you are reaching a certain age, whatever the catalyst may be, something just makes you start questioning, am I really happy here? Am I really happy with what's happening? At a certain point, even all of this like wanted attention starts, the desire for it starts fading away. And you're left asking yourself, is this the kind of life that I want it to be, or am I happy in it? So the trick here is, I think, that a lot of women think that they're in a really good place. And that can be very challenging to
Mm.
even step forward into starting asking questions, because I can tell you throughout my 20s I didn't really think anything was wrong. It's like I had these like
Mm.
little questions in the back of my mind sometimes. Well, I'm like, I wonder why I always like want to get into a relationship and then get bored with it really fast and dump them. But it's not important enough for me to actually figure out why. So
Mm.
another year
Mm.
goes by, and
Mm.
so it's a very tricky place to be.
Yeah, I think that's actually insightful for sure, because I think we all have sneaky ways of lying to ourselves, uh, and we have, and that's part of our coping. You know, is
Mm-hmm.
like how we bypass the pain. And more recently, I did one of my meetings of men, and then the title was like how to resolve anger or something like that. My least attended meeting of men ever. You know,
Uh-huh.
and even some of the men that were there at times would have to give the disclaimer like I don't have any problems, I just know that I get frustrated, and I'm like, oh, that's okay, cool, I learned something. I was like, why aren't guys showing up, and I talked to
Mm-hmm.
Traver, and he's like, yeah, guys won't admit that they have angst because that's dangerous, or that's not respectable. But a guy that says that he deals with nice tendencies, which always leads to anger and rage. Yeah, every hand up. So I'm like, okay. So we have ways of being real sneaky. It's a really good point that you make. Um, but it made me think of another kind of branch to that, was knowing that you're, kind of that you fit into that kind of certified holistic health and wellness code, focusing more on women. I know we've talked about a little bit in the past, just like that dynamic between the feminine masculine energies. Um, but I've also talked about in some of your content about like calling upon inner wisdom. And I don't, maybe you could define what that inner wisdom that's at the core of the work that you do with women, because that'll probably be relevant to the men
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Well, that's a good question. first and foremost, the inner wisdom and the inner knowing is not something you can put under any definition because it varies for every person.
It's
Like
different.
my,
Okay.
yeah, my inner knowing can lead me to whatever, being single for a year, moving to a different state, traveling around, doing all the things because I know that even though that's not what I want, because super scared to be by myself, that's what
Yeah.
I needed. That's where the honesty part also comes into play, where you have to be radically honest with yourself, especially in the things that you don't really want to be. For somebody else, it can be, for again, going back to the example of the successful executive, it can be, well, I actually really do want a partnership, and I do
Hmm.
want, and kind of need to prioritize that and work harder towards it. And that's where I
Hmm.
feel I actually held like an in-person workshop a couple times about finding that unshakable confidence and inner wisdom, and that was co-ed. That was for both men and women,
Hmm.
because the inner knowing exists in all of us, and the ways to access it, it could maybe vary a little bit based on feminine, masculine, dominant energies, which, by the way, to those of you that don't know, we all have. Both men and women have
Hmm.
both energies.
Hmm.
And depending on which one you're dominant, which one is dominant in you, we can kind of customize better ways for you to access it, I feel. So the practices that I moved through, so this workshop I mentioned was just like a stepping stone into that, a 90-minute kind of like introduction into that. But the process is actually, it's long and it's constant, and you do it throughout your life, and it's always a growing process.
Right.
And what I feel, and the way that I do my work, and the way that I see things, we start by taking honest inventory of our lives, and how where we feel that we are lacking, or just not a 10 out of 10, or whatever it is that just not, we're not feeling satisfied. And we continue with committed action. And
Mm.
that's not easy to do. And it starts with a little thing. I started with having a cup of lemon every morning. And it was like, oh, well, now I'm going to have a cup of lemon every morning for the rest of my life. I don't want to do that. That's like so annoying. So I started with like, no, how about you just do it for a day and see what it feels like? Oh, that was nice. My body feels good. Let's try that for a week. Next thing you know, it's a habit I've been like on for like 2 years now. And
Is this squeezed lemon, or are you dicing a lemon up and then eating it? Like,
I,
how are you exactly doing this? Because that's
that
a
cup of
cup of
lemon,
lemon is it's a lot of lemon.
well, it's not a full cup of only lemons. It's half a lemon squeezed with a spoon of apple cider vinegar and
Okay.
warm water,
So
not too hot, not too cold.
okay, so you're cutting the lemon a little bit. Okay. I was gonna say that's
Just,
that's worse than cold plunge every
well,
morning, I think.
you can do a shot of lemon. So it's funny because you mentioned before, you mentioned I'm a certified holistic health and wellness coach.
Yep.
It is like, I'm not a big fan of titles and certifications. I don't talk about that often because I don't think it matters. But part of my training has to do with holistic nutrition. I just don't want to be giving nutrition advice to people because I don't find that that's my calling.
Yeah.
But I can't like tell you the benefits of incorporating that every day into your diet, of having oatmeal in the morning, and of like turmeric and its inflammatory properties. These things, as much as it like, oh, all this like health trends and blah blah blah, they support your physical body, your nervous system, your mental state more than you realize. So for me, like
Hmm.
having a cup of lemon every day is, on a spiritual level, the commitment that I have every day and I practice every day along with other things like meditation, other stuff. And on the physical side is super, super protective of my immune system and body in general. So has more than one benefits. And like I said, it
I
looks
love
like a
that.
different thing for every person, but that's exactly what we get
Hmm.
to explore.
Which is the exact opposite what a lot of Americans do, which is coffee and caffeine. And it's extremely inflammatory and
Mm-hmm.
dehydrating. And I digress. Anyways,
It's a whole
very,
nutritional
very
thing.
cool. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But no, I appreciate the understanding that the inner wisdom isn't just something that you could define or look on Google. It's
Yeah.
it's really something that I think requires a lot of consciousness presence, um, which clearly was not something I was very good at. It's just like working out. It's time. It's like a muscle. I feel like, you can
Mm-hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it requires some sort of like mindfulness practice, like you said, meditation, prayer, or, um, whatever that might be. For some people, it might be yoga,
Mhm.
but something where you just kind of slow down this fast-paced life, because it's just overwhelming. We talked before we started recording that we're both feeling overwhelmed right now.
Absolutely. And you don't
Yeah.
always want to go there, just like you don't always want to do that extra rep in the gym or, whatever it is that you're
Oh, I
committed
always
to.
do. I always do.
Do you
Every
always
time.
want to?
I
Every time?
always want to. Yeah. And then I yell really loud so everyone, and I have my headbands on and my sweaters and my leg warmers. It's just
Well,
part of my style, Jim. But not everyone
teach
is
us
like
all
me.
your wise ways then.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I agree though. I agree.
Hmm.
It's the uncomfortable part of like for the personal development is like doing those extra reps. You so want to stop because it's scary or it's painful. Uh,
Absolutely. And you don't
that
want to admit, so the inner knowing piece, again, like I said
yeah.
before, it's sometimes it's something that you don't want to be true. So you will do
Mhm.
everything in your power to avoid admitting that. The last thing I wanted to do as I turned 30 was to spend a whole year like as a single woman, taking care of herself, not reaching out to all of like the men she used to rely on. Not because like I wanted to continue to be some sort of damsel, but because I'm like, the last thing I want to do is actually the thing I need to do the most. And I really just don't want to do that because, like, I started also for me personally, I started thinking, I'm like, well, I'm just going to end up an old lady with cats. Like, that's it. It's doomsday. It's the end of the world for me. And usually that's a good indication when we feel like we're so against something, feels like I really, really don't want to do this. It's a really good place to start asking why that is. For me, the radical honesty piece came when I was like, well, you don't want to because you know you need to, because you need to show yourself something here that you are trying to, or trying to wait for someone else to show to you. And that's just not possible.
I coached for 8 years prior to switching over to men, and I was doing primarily life coaching. I can't tell you how many times women that's like their greatest fear is to either be the old woman who's alone and has cats, or she has lots of little dogs. But either way, they're small, little fuzzy animals. That's the worst thing that could ever happen to a woman. Why is that? Because it's not like I'm going to be an old man with lots of cats. They don't say that.
Because it's not, I got nothing against dogs or cats, love them. It's
Love
the
them.
idea that you'll have those as companion instead of a profound relationship because you couldn't find one or you somehow failed in life.
Yeah.
And to go back to the inner knowing piece again, it could very well be that your inner knowing is that you enjoy your singlehood right now and you want it to, like, you're just trying to force something on yourself because society has told you that you need to be married by a certain age or have children by a certain age. And so you really don't want to admit that you really just enjoy being single or you just want to have fun
Mhm.
or you never want kids because God forbid you should ever admit you don't want kids.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
I think prior to that, though, you made a really good point, which I've it resonates too, and things that I've thought about. Like, oftentimes, and let's take the example of being in the gym. Uh, I think it's a relevant one. A lot of us can resonate with, perhaps, where you do ultimately want to give up and stop when it's painful. It hurts the most. You're the most exhausted, and yet those last few reps are going to be where the actual growth is. So you have to lean into the very thing that your body and part of your primal voicing out to stop. Uh, I find that the older I get, the more I realize it's everything that I intuitively want to do, especially if it comes from a place of fear or overwhelm or scarcity or that sort of thing. The solution is always counter to, or is the opposite of, right? And so it's like, okay, I'm getting into an argument and all I do is bolt, and just be like, fuck this, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
The solution now is actually to like take a couple deep breaths and to lean into that conversation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And those are like the few reps where, and I've experienced that in the last several relationships where like it only makes that relationship. I love those type of conversations because then I'm like, man, that fucking sucked, but I'm like so much closer with you. I'm so much more attracted to you. Like, let's go, versus holding that against each other and then we don't talk for a day or shit that I used to do to go. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever's counterintuitive to what our kind of our fear
Instinct.
focused intuition, our instincts to do. So
Hmm.
I guess I'm saying all that because I think it's hard, it's difficult, and maybe this is at least for me, it's really difficult to distinguish between inner wisdom and like fear. Like my inner wisdom saying get out of this relationship because it's God, or do I love this person so much that I just keep leaning into it? You know what I mean? How do
Yeah,
you
and I love
distinguish
this
between
question.
that?
I love it. So I actually heard this described in this way at some point, and it really made a lot of sense for me. So fear feels like contraction. It feels
Mhm.
like it makes you feel like smaller, kind of like more things are associated with negativity, negative feelings. Whereas intuition feels expansive. It doesn't
Mm,
mean it's not scary at all, but it feels expansive. So,
mm,
for example, as I'm now traveling and have to road trip by myself. I actually came here on a road trip as well. So before I got here, I asked myself, do I want to fly out and do it ABCD, or do I want to road trip? And I couldn't tell between fear and intuition. Am I just afraid to do a road trip, or is my intuition telling me this isn't a good idea, get on a plane?
mhm,
And some advice that I can give, or practices that I feel work, are slowing down, taking time, and sitting with yourself. And Connor Beaton said this once and it made me laugh. Like, sitting with your emotions doesn't mean sitting your ass down in front of Netflix and binge watching through the night. It
mhm,
means sitting in, actually, like sitting in silence and listening to yourself. So it can look different for everyone. It can be journaling, it can be meditation, it can be a nature walk, and really listen to what your body is saying, not your mind, your body. So when I thought about the road trip, I recognized that the contraction in me was fear based. I really wanted to do the road trip. I was just afraid of everything that would go wrong, of everyone around me telling me this is really dangerous, risky, whatever it may be. And it wasn't like there was no part in me that said, like, don't do this because it's unsafe. There was just like, okay, there's a reasonable amount of safety measures that you need to take. But ultimately, you will come out way bigger and better after this experience if you end up doing it and going for it. So that
mhm.
that was like, okay, so because this felt expansive, I know my intuition was like towards doing it. So that's a big difference between those. And like, if you're in a relationship, you can ask yourself the same questions, like, am I wanting to run because I'm afraid, or is my intuition trying to tell me that this isn't the right relationship for me? And no one has those answers but you. And
Mm,
a piece that I do want to go back to, that was very interesting, that you said, going back to the gym analogy, kind of like getting to those final, like, extra pushes, like where you get the growth from.
mm.
It's still, at the same time, you don't want to push so far you tear a muscle, right? So like,
Yeah.
you don't want to
You don't
go
want to
too
go
hard
to
too
injury.
fast.
Mhm,
Exactly. So you don't want to go too hard too fast, and you don't want to go you kind of want to take it, build, first of all, build your skills and build yourself up to the level where you can make, like, have more, do more reps, um, in the same way that you want to build your emotional capacity to hold more space and to be able to deal with more in your life, and you want to be gentle on yourself.
mm,
So the way I see it, and I feel that it's very similar for men and women, but I see it in women more, like, it's never helpful to push, and we never try to push through something that is really scary. Like, it could have been that, in my road trip situation, I was afraid to do that, and maybe it would have been just fear. But if it was too much and it was too overwhelming, it probably wouldn't have been smart for me to try to push and force it through. So it's really delicate. And I feel like part of the beauty of receiving help, whether it's support from trusted friends or your family or coaches or therapists or any kind of professionals, that they can help you navigate that. What does this mean? What is my body really telling me? Because ultimately, you have the answers in you. You have the inner knowing, you have the power in you. It's all in you.
yeah.
We kind of just probably don't really know how to read it and interpret it yet.
Yes, and I'd say to piggyback on that, at least in my experience, and with guys and women for that matter, um, two things there. One is like being a kind of recovering nice guy. I would get to argue, say, with a significant other, and I would feel myself wanting to bolt, but then I'd be like, oh, but that's what typical guys do. So I'm going to stay here. I'm going to keep like, but I'm really available. I'm already shut down. I'm resentful. But I just stay in the fight, really express, that she's pushing me too far. or she says, or I'm really, really hurt, or I need some space, or I need to take, it'd be no different than, signing up with a personal trainer. And personal trainer push you to the point you injure yourself, even though I'm where you're just like, I think I'm going to hurt myself, but you don't say anything out of it, or you don't want to be ashamed. And I think that's one of those things I've really learned for myself too, which is like when I get really heated, you know what? I need 20 minutes. I need 30 minutes. I'm going to go walk away. You've probably heard this so many times. So like, I'm going to go walk away. I'll be back in 30 minutes and we'll resume this when calmer heads prevail. So that has helped. And I wanted to throw that out there just for men and women that are listening. Okay, that's a good point. Like you have to be willing to say, okay, if it's too far, I'm actually maybe going to say something that's going to hurt you or it's going to hurt. So I need to go back and take a break. You have to kind of know your limits. And then the other part, did I lose it? You were saying, I lost it. I had another idea, but I can't remember. Anyways, there you go. That's the fun of podcast. Something having to do with relationships. Anyways, I don't know if any of that resonates for you, but that's where
it definitely does, and that's part of what we talk about when we say we don't push, we don't force. So like it's really important to be able to communicate the way you're feeling at the moment, and I feel like the part of why it requires having that much awareness from both sides is because for another wounded individual, also saying like, you know what, I need 20 minutes can be interpreted as like, no, like you don't leave, if you leave this conversation now, like it's over and we're done and blah blah. Whereas really, if we did our work and tried to understand the other side better, because like I won't go into whole attachment theories, but if, for example, you're dealing with someone with avoidant tendencies and they really genuinely need this time to regroup because otherwise they're just going to shut down and stonewall, it's actually so much more beneficial to be like, okay, I realize this isn't about me. I'm going to give you the time you need, but I need to know when are you going to return so we can talk about this? Or like, let's put a time limit so you're back and we're going to continue the conversation. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, this applies to so many different kinds of relationship. I personally experienced this. This was like a few months ago at this point, but with my family that I was on a FaceTime call with, and things got really heated with my mother. We were talking about something that the argument got heated, and I felt that I was this close, like very close to saying something that I'm going to regret. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to stop right now because I need to breathe for a second because I don't want to say anything that I'll regret. And, her immediate response was trying to repair, but I'm like, we're not in repair mode yet. I just need a second. And I walked away for a few minutes. I did what I did, returned to myself, took a few breaths, and returned actually level-headed and was able to say exactly why I got to where I got, how we can resolve it for next time, and what lessons we can learn from it. And it doesn't always happen that fast, but the idea you just brought forward about taking a breath and being able to communicate that, and the other side being able to receive that and accept it, it'll go miles and miles in like improving the relationships in your life.
Yeah, and I think that's good because I feel I've been on the receiving end, at least with women that I've dated, where, especially, I mean, the younger version, progressively younger version of me had less vocabulary and connection with being articulate how I'm feeling. So the more I talked, the more she would press. Like, how are you feel? Like, why aren't you talking? What's going, like, you're just sitting there. What do you feel anything? Do you even care? Do you should like she wanted to see something, but those eruptions would make her feel like, oh, okay, you care. But for me, I'd be like so ashamed and I'd be so angry. I needed more of her to just hold space, like, not really pushing me. In the same, personal trainer could over push a client and really injure them, or push me to the point I say something, I just explode. But that anger of like pressure, not knowing how to say something, that frustration of like, it's like telling like a little kid who hasn't able to speak, like, use your word, do what you want, don't just cry. Like for a lot of guys, I forget where I began. Like I had no words. I don't even know how to express. Like I know, again, I'm to what we were saying earlier. I know I'm not happy. I feel stuck. I feel kind of just vanilla, or I don't know why. I don't know exactly what. And so it was a lot of that repressed anger that made me apathetic, made me numb. Thus, to my point, I could not even really check to see if I was feeling fear or if I was feeling like expanse, contraction. I didn't even have that body awareness or like emotionals. So I want guys and women to be listening to this. If you're like, they're talking about things that I'm not even experiencing. I'm just giving permission to be like, it's okay. Like, just know it's a process in the same way that like you have to walk into the gym and have your stay, at some
Hmm.
point, you know,
Hmm.
have to give yourself the grace to not like beat yourself up if,
Yeah.
you realize that you're just a beginner in some of these things of emotional awareness or emotionalness.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating what you're saying. And it makes me remember and also want to speak to the women listening, that it's important. Like when I was in my phase of like lack of awareness, quite the opposite from what you're describing. I was always very good with my words and always very good with articulating how I feel. I think
Yeah.
that in general, a lot of women are, but I
Women
specifically
are.
am just, yes. But I always I felt like I took it to the next level. It was always reflected to me that I'm such a good communicator and all the things. And I definitely know that I went too far in a lot of places using that ability to articulate my emotion, in a comprehensible way to kind of like beat my partner into submission of like, do you like understand what I'm saying to you? Because I can talk about this for another hour because I can, and because it makes me feel good, it makes me feel all whatever. But it was less about expressing how I feel and more about almost like explaining to them where they went wrong. Like, here's where you're
Hmm.
wrong, and this is why you made me feel this. And like, we
Hmm.
never, when we're in a healthy communication, never want to tell the other person, like, you make me feel blah, blah, blah. We kind of want to focus on, here's my experience, and here's how I'm feeling. And, I
Good
statements and all this
point.
stuff. Yeah, for
Hmm.
those of us that don't know, I statements, basically when you want to approach conflict in a way, it's always better to focus on your experiences versus blaming someone else for how they're making you feel. So it'll be
Yep.
like, I feel, insert whatever you feel, when you blah blah blah, because it makes me no 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 no. Like, just kind of like sticking to the facts. When you do something, it makes me feel something, versus
Hmm.
you as a person make me feel A, B, or C. So
Hmm.
for me, for the woman's experience, or the way that I, as a woman that can speak and kind of like wasn't aware of the things I am today, I definitely was in situations where I was pushing my partners well beyond their capacity with like three
Hmm.
hour long conversations about our emotions and stuff. And them, I mean, granted, they have their responsibility, like 50 side of a street, your side of the street, where they didn't tell me, like, I can't do this, like, I need a break, I can't hold it for that long, or I can't speak about it to this depth, or I don't have the skills. Sure, they didn't say that. But on my side of the street is, I wasn't aware that was even a need that a man
Hmm.
has. And like, because I feel like also this is something men don't talk about. We're not taught. So I'm like, if he cared about me, he listened. If he cared about me, he showed emotion. If he cared about me, he stayed. He would stay. But
Hmm.
like, that's not really how that works. And it's very important, like you mentioned, yes, for men to have the emotional awareness and capacity and ability to express that, and for the woman to understand that it's not about her, and she needs to allow for that space for him, because otherwise we're just like crashing. And I do want to go ahead and repeat something I said before, but that I am speaking to the heteronormative experience, but it goes to all kinds of relationships and all kinds of capacities.
Oh, 100%. I have the same exact conversations with my dad. And it doesn't make a difference whether whether we're talking about him and dating his boyfriends or, and I say, plural and singular, it's, I think it's one of those things that goes both ways. I agree with you. And I do feel like, statistically, what women typically use 6,000 words a day and men use 2,000, right? So, three times more than men do have the practice, right? And I would agree with you that just because tattoos, like if you really cared, you'd say something, or you'd be like, uh, like you have no idea how much I care. I think women would be surprised how much men truly care. I do feel like there's going to a book called Respect, and I forget who the authors are, husband and wife, but it kind of talks about how, and this is again a very broad brush, that it's both kind of forms of love, but that women typically need to feel loved and men need respected.
Mm.
And if men don't feel respected, act unlovingly towards their woman. And if
Mm.
she's not feel loved, she'll act disrespectfully towards her. And so I see it too as like men use a men, you know, if not even physical abandonment, emotional abandonment as his weapons. And that really is probably a bigger trigger for women to abandon than it is for men. But the bigger trigger for men is when, you know, I've heard a lot of men say, like, I know my wife loves, but I don't think she likes me. AKA, I don't think she actually respects me. And that's worse for men than death, right? So the way that women are able to use their words, because they're not physically wrong as we are, right, to really, really hurt a man
Mhm.
by acting disrespectful, I think is why it's a really good conversation having, because we get into those points where we do get far that it's almost like I either want to and you have to lose if I'm going to win, or if I'm going to lose, I'm going to take you down with me. We're both going to lose, and that's when
Mhm.
relationships fall apart, and then it's divorce or whatever, and say fuck it. And I think the real key, obviously, is to a point where you're in everything that you're doing, whether you're talking about relationships or business or whatever, it's like win-win outcome.
Mhm.
I think that really is one of the biggest things. It has so much to do with communication, and
Agreed.
I think a big part of that is the communication that we've been kind of peppering this conversation, whether it be talking to your mom or talking to an ex, even talking to yourself, right? How many of us have
Mhm.
those inner conversations that are really, really judgmental, really, really
Yeah.
tough, right? So
Communication and healthy communication in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
what I love too about what you're talking about though is, you know, and the way that I try to approach this podcast for myself too is that, just we say we're coaches or we're certified or we like, hey, we're fucking human beings. And it's as if like we don't deal with overwhelm or, you
Yeah.
having a whole lot of unknowns road trip, or like tough being in the new tree and new culture, all like I think we as people and listeners, to this podcast can give up our sense of ego where we have to pretend like we have our shit
Mhm.
together, even though deep we're really freaking scared.
Yep.
The
It's
better
absolutely because of
would
that.
be.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
We'll expand on that. Do you think it's the ego, it's the pride, it's the fear, it's the what pushes us like we have to look like we have our shit together when we all know deep down inside none of us really do. We're all just like little kids in adult bodies trying to figure shit out.
Yeah. My one word answer to that, why we
Yeah,
do
I
that,
only one word,
belonging.
belonging.
We
Tell me
have,
more about that.
we 100% not only want, but biologically, evolutionarily want to need to belong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was Abraham Hicks that said this, and maybe I heard Mark Groves repeat it. I hope I'm not messing up the credit for this. But in the face, or maybe it was Bormate, but in the face of, if authenticity is like if you are faced with sacrificing your authenticity for belonging, belonging will often win. So you will sacrifice your true self or your true desires
Mm-hmm.
if it means you're going to belong to whatever it is, society, company, or something that you want to belong to. Because if you don't, evolutionarily, that means death. If you're like ostracized from the tribe, and you kind of like in our nervous fight or flight systems, the idea of it is like it's equivalent to death. So to kind of tie that into what you were saying, I feel that there's definitely ego in that, and a sense of like, if I show the world that I'm successful, if I have certain numbers in the bank, if I am like some kind of alpha male or some kind of successful female or whatever it is, then I will be chosen, accepted, revered, admired, wanted, and basically belong, right? Because our society kind of like pedestals those types, like the people, the men and women that, specifically men, I guess, with making money and being very successful, and the woman who's in a long-term relationship and has a lot of kids, and and a happy whatever, like whatever it is that we've decided is the norm is being idolized. And so we want to like seem perfect, because then we will be admired, wanted, belong to some kind of elite society in our minds that is perfect. Whereas I'm saying, and you just said that, where I feel genuine souls connect with other souls, even in a professional capacity of a client working with a coach or a therapist or whatever, is exactly in those imperfect parts, exactly in those imperfections. When you see someone's vulnerability and someone stepping up and saying, hey, I'm not very happy. I've dealt with depression. I've been broken up with. I'm heartbroken right now. I'm afraid. I'm scared. You kind of show up as your true self. And when you find, like, some people are going to not want any part of that because of whatever their reasons are, whatever their wounding is. And other people will be like, hey, I feel this and I'm not alone. And let's talk about it. And that's where you truly belong, because that's a true sense of belonging. It's not like on the surface based on titles and numbers. It's true, like soul to soul connections. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work, because I feel that through that, like, whoever is drawn to working with me and whoever I feel drawn to working with, or even or not even just working with, but a romantic capacity, friendships, the people I choose to let into my energy, I know are there because they're meant to be. And the connection is genuine. So that's like, maybe Terry Cole says, a long way around the barn to get to the point. But yeah, 100% our need to belong, and be chosen drives a lot of our actions and the way we choose to present ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's something that I've been passionate, just haven't put a real word to it until last couple of years. Is that sense of belonging. And I remember being, especially in like being insecure, like I remember I'd work hard to make sure that certain people that maybe weren't popular as I was, just because I was the traditional, athlete, yada yada. I wanted them to feel like belonged. And yet at the same time, out of my own desire to like fit in, I certainly also teased and bullied people, right? And I would feel so much shame at, right? And so I think that's a big of what we can continue to do as adults, where we just feel adequate. And the whole part of for me becoming kings, that sweet spot in the middle, without going into the whole diagram and I talk about in my book, is like of men feeling that they're in integrity or they are congruent with who inside, how it shows up in their behavior on their on that, and I feel like a lot of what you've talked about on social media kind of talks about this a similar thing, just in the queen form, you say.
Mm-hmm. I was joking with you before we started recording that I'll like take over the podcast and turn it into becoming queens for the day.
Yeah.
But absolutely. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I actually named, which is again kind of like certifications and titles. I don't really, names are just tools of marketing. But my one-on-one program is called From Damsel to Queen for that reason. But it can be called whatever the hell that resonates with you. Can I say hell on your podcast?
Oh
Say
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
encouraged to.
Yeah.
Whatever the hell that means to you, that from lack of empowerment to like, swimming in it, from whatever, from someone who couldn't do this to someone who does everything on her, call it whatever the hell you want. The damsel to queen are just names and titles, and yeah, but absolutely a very similar journey for the woman experience.
Well, and I was going to bring that up because I think that's one thing I was going to wanted to kind of elaborate to with in that work. And we've obviously talked about a lot of the reasons why doing the work is so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of you coaching others and women, and stuff like taking them from damsel to queen, what is the ultimate outcome, or is there one? What are what are you finding? A lot of women are contacting you or working with you. What are they looking for, and what is it that you can really although yes, I realize we just spent 45 minutes to an hour really talking, like, where do you first get started with them?
Mm-hmm. So it's always about them, always and forever. The coaching journey is about the client, is about the person that's coming to me. We have to map out together and co-create a program together to where they want to go. Because I'm not coming to you saying, like, here's where you are and here's where I'm going to get you. I'm like, let's talk about where you are and you tell me where you desire to get to, and we'll build the way to get there together. So for the most part, it turns like the exercises that I have, the modules that I've built they're pretty similar, and they kind of like work with a lot of different women because it's kind of like a general arch that you can just kind of customize to every person. So even though I can't tell you exactly what each person needs or want, but what I see most prevalent, and like I've experienced it in my life, and I see it sometimes in women that I meet and women that I know that maybe don't see it in themselves, but it's the getting to a place in your life where you really know and believe that you are absolutely capable and that you can do things that you don't need to be done for you, managed for you, helped, saved in a way. And I know that some women listening to this, and more power to you, are like, I don't have a problem, doing everything or whatever it is that I want and blah, blah, blah. And I have friends like that, like, which is amazing. But I've been in a place and I know what it feels like to put on a show where you are super independent, like the lead actress in your own life, but really you're in a very stagnant place of like, well, there's a genuine, legit fear inside me that I can't do this. I really want to get up and travel or buy a car or whatever it is, like break up with this person or move and live on my own. And I just don't believe that I can. And it's
Yeah.
super terrifying. And that it's so terrifying that it's almost paralyzing. And you end up living your life in a stagnant place where you don't step up because you don't believe that you can. So that's where I kind of come in with what I talk about, how you actually can. And it's not going to be so fun and comfortable, and it's not going to take a day, but you actually can. And we get to
Yeah.
work on how that looks like together, or what that
Yeah.
looks like.
Well, it's cool, obviously, that you walk your talk. You've lived that process, and you too. You're right. And it's cool to hear that there's a framework, but it's not like you just put someone in and plug and play and it's out. That they kind of get to dictate kind of where they go with the coaching journey, and you're there to support them. So they tell them this is exactly how to get to queen. They get to define on their own. At least that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we get to work on together.
Someone that's listening who wants to read more about you, connect, follow, what are all the things? How can they
All the
connect with you?
things. Well,
Yeah.
I am most active on Instagram and most available. My handle is The Honest Compass. You can look it up through using that, or my name, Ranit Damti. That's Ranit, first name, Damti is my last name. And you can always reach out through my DMs. My email, thehonestcompass@gmail.com, always available there. And I also have a website of the same name, www.thehonestcompass.com. All those varied ways you can reach out to me. I'm pretty accessible.
Yeah.
And I also offer a free connection call just to see if we're a good fit. There's never, like I said before, any forcing into anything. So,
Love it.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Renee, thank you. Thanks for being on. Thank you for pitching and catching with me. As always, it's a pleasure. I love what you're doing. Obviously, there's clearly a lot of resonance between this that we're doing in terms of helping men and women. And I think for sure, regardless of who's listening, a lot of value in this conversation. So thank you, guys. Go follow Ranit. Like she said, you can go to compass.com. You can follow her on Instagram, The Honest Compass. All the things. Connect with her and comment. Let her know if her
Connect with me
content, it's good.
yeah. No, if
Jump
you
on
know
the
any women
phone.
in your life that could use this, please reach out. And also, Tony, thank you so much for having me. This has been a treat and a pleasure.
Oh yeah.
And I can't wait to see what we can continue to co-create together, because I do feel we're like on very parallel roads, and absolutely believe in the work that you do. So thank you for the service that you provide in your own way.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise. Thank you for listening, sister, brother, sister, king, queen. You guys for listening. We'll catch up with you guys on the next episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. Cheers.